The Communist Chinese government has imposed a strict new security law in Hong Kong. How will it affect religious freedom? Retired Bishop of Hong Kong, Cardinal Joseph Zen, will tell us. And later, former Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich talks about his latest book, Trump and the American Future. Sharon Robinson, daughter of baseball legend Jackie Robinson, shares memories of her legendary dad and growing up during the Civil Rights Movement. Finally, priest and columnist Father Dwight Longenecker joins us to discuss spiritual warfare in his new book, Immortal Combat, the World Over. Begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We're delighted you're here with us. Cardinal Joseph Zen, Newt Gingrich, Sharon Robinson, and Father Dwight Longenecker are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I'll read them. Let's get started. He's the retired Bishop of Hong Kong. He joins us tonight with an update on the persecuted church in his native China and how this new so-called security law recently enacted in Hong Kong may hinder religious freedom. Here's my interview with Joseph Cardinal Zen. On June 30th, China passed this new security law for Hong Kong. It makes it easier for them to punish protesters. It reduces Hong Kong's autonomy. The details of the law were kept secret until it was passed, and it criminalizes any act of secession, breaking away from the country, subversion, undermining the power or authority of the central government, terrorism, using violence or intimidation against people, or collusion with foreign or external forces. Now, in addition, Hong Kong will have to establish its own National Security Commission to enforce this law, with Beijing appointing an advisor. Now, Beijing will have power over how the law should be interpreted, and not any Hong Kong judicial or policy body. If the new law conflicts with any Hong Kong statute, the Beijing law takes priority. It effectively strips away the freedom of speech and protest for the people of Hong Kong. Your Eminence, what does this mean to the Catholic Church and to your fellow citizens in Hong Kong?
I think there is no need to distinguish the church from the people, because there is or there is no freedom. So when you have freedom, you have also religious freedom. We don't have religious freedom because we don't have freedom. Now, with this so-called national security law, we are back to the Cultural Revolution. And they have ignored everything in the basic law in this agreement with the United Kingdom. And so we are at the mercy of this new commission. Okay, I went through the whole text of the law, but it's easy to tell you just in one sentence. Now they can do anything. They can do anything. Yeah. Okay, they say normally it's like this and that, and then say in the special circumstances we can do this and that. So they can do everything. So we need your prayer because we are in the hands of the madness of our government.
Wow. Cardinal John Tong Han, who's the Apostolic Administrator of the Diocese of Hong Kong, had this to say. He said, "I personally believe that the national security law will have no effect on religious freedom because Article 32 of the Basic Law guarantees that we have freedom of religion and we can openly preach and hold religious ceremonies and participate in religious activities. The diocese has always had a direct relationship with the Vatican. The relationship between the Hong Kong diocese and the Vatican should be regarded as an internal matter." Do you agree with that, Your Eminence?
I'm a good brother to Cardinal Tong, but he has to be obedient to the instruction from the Vatican. And now to be with the Vatican almost means to be also full of respect to the Chinese government. And so I can suppose that there may be some difference between what Cardinal Tong thinks and what I am saying, because for me, the Vatican is pursuing constantly a policy of submissiveness to the Chinese government. And so
wow.
I cannot explain the meaning of what Cardinal Tom said, because for me, the basic law is finished.
So you don't believe religious freedom is protected under this new law?
No, no. And even before this national security law, people are talking that our next bishop, you know, we don't have bishop now,
right.
since 1.5 year, yeah. And they say the new bishop needs the blessing from Beijing. That means the basic law is over, because when myself and Cardinal John Tong, we were ordained the bishops, we had full freedom. But this freedom, which is there in the basic law, but the basic law disappeared with this new national security law.
Yeah, and for those who don't understand, in 1997, when the British handed Hong Kong back to the Chinese, there were all kinds of agreements, including that Hong Kong would maintain its autonomy and would have its own laws. It would be separate from the mainland. It seems this law eradicates anything in that agreement, that it supersedes all of that. Do you expect to see the same Sinization that we've seen in church affairs in Hong Kong that we've seen throughout China?
I think on the surface, nothing changed as about religion, and so we may have better to talk about freedom in general, because it's about everybody and not only the church. The church makes no difference, because after this so-called national security law, they called all the representatives of the religions. We in Hong Kong, they recognize 6 religions, and the leaders and also other people from the Catholic Church, I heard that there were 5 or 6 people went there, called by the local government to express their opinion. Now you can see what opinion you can say in those circumstances. We don't know what Cardinal Tong actually said, but after that, when interviewed by our Catholic Weekly, he said that in this moment we must be united among ourselves and just concentrate in the work of evangelization. Now, I really find myself in difficulty to understand what is this unity, because if that means to be subservient to the government, to applaud to this law is against my conscience, because this law is taking away all the freedoms, not only religious freedom, but simply the freedom. And so we are losing the freedom of speech. So everybody is afraid. And I'm telling people, it's okay if you are afraid. You would be foolish not to be afraid, because this law can do anything to you. So many people are going away, and I think they do well, because it's not wise to be sacrificed uselessly, because we are facing madness. We are facing a new cultural revolution.
You, Your Eminence, have said you're prepared to suffer arrest and trials under this new security law. Do you worry that's going to happen soon? And have there been any threats against you or other bishops in Hong Kong by the government since the passage of this law?
Oh, I don't think I will be among the first people, but anybody in Hong Kong, if you come out to say something against this law, and anything may be taken as against this law, and so nobody will be spared. So why I should make exception of myself? But I think we bishops, even emeritus, we have a duty to defend the freedom, because by our episcopal ordination, we are now responsible for the understanding of the doctrine of the church, and the church is on the side of the persecuted, and so we're bound to say something which may be taken as offense against the new law.
Yeah. Your Eminence, this past Sunday, Pope Francis dropped a reference to Hong Kong and a plea for religious freedom there from the text of his public message. Now, in the text, which was given to Vatican journalists before the Angelus address, the Pope planned to comment on Hong Kong and religious freedom. Why do you think the Pope chose not to say anything about the situation in Hong Kong?
I have seen the text, which is very mild, in no way offensive to the Chinese government. But still, I don't know why the Pope abstained from pronouncing those words. But I suppose you know all the conjectures, the guessing of the people. Some say maybe the Holy Father thought that it's better not to say, or some say he may have received some words from the Chinese embassy in Italy, or something like that. And I think it's no surprise, because it's not a isolated episode. It's already a long-standing policy of the Vatican not to offend the Chinese government. They never said a word.
Yeah, they've said next to nothing about the protests or the rising problems in Hong Kong prior to this law being passed. Do you believe there's truth to the story that the Vatican may have received money from the Chinese government to buy its silence? There was that story last week around the world.
Yeah, that comes from a Chinese businessman now in the United States. He is very well informed about many things, but I cannot be sure about the exact size of this episode, and even whether it is true. But the fact that there is such a plan in the Chinese Communist policy, he called a portion of their business with a country, that the money is used for such purposes. And so I think the Vatican has to come out and to deny, because there is a saying that silence is to admit. So it's important to come out to deny, because otherwise we Catholic people, we can feel very much confused.
No, the silence certainly speaks in its own way. Your Eminence, you've been highly critical of the Vatican-China deal, signed over a year ago, pointing out that the Vatican has gotten nothing out of it. What do you make of the calls of Archbishop Marietcheli to renew the deal for 1 to 2 more years?
You see, Raymond, I give no importance to that so-called agreement. First of all, because it is secret, I don't know anything exactly, but I can guess that agreement is more or less a way which things were going before the agreement. There was a long time a kind of compromise in the appointment of the bishops. I don't think that agreement be very much different. But the things which happened after that, much worse,
Right.
like the legitimization of the 7 bishops. I understand that the Holy See legitimized many people, but those are good people, people who surrendered to the government under very high pressure. You can imagine those times before or immediately after the Cultural Revolution, and many accept to be ordained illegitimately under pressure. And if they refuse, they go to prison or to labor camps, and they die there. So when the open door policy started, they approached the Holy See, they humbly recognized their mistake, and they asked to be legitimized. And at the time, the prefect of the Congregation for Evangelization was Cardinal Tomko, and he made some investigation, and then the Holy See legitimized. And those are bishops, good. So it was encouragement, consolation for those bishops and for their people. But now these 7 people are all different. For many years, they challenged the church. They challenged doctrine and the rule of the church. And even after this legitimization, we see no sign of their repentance or their gratitude to the Holy Father for the generosity for giving them. And they just went around singing triumph. Now they are winners. They have been clever to follow the government. But the worst thing is what happened 1 year ago. The so-called pastoral guidance for the clergy about this registration. That's terrible. A document without a specification from which department of the Holy See, and no signature, but I know, everybody knows, it must be the work of Cardinal Parolin. Now, last year, the day after I saw that document, I took a flight to Rome. I asked Holy Father a favor. I said, I'm here for 4 days. Please call me. I want to discuss with Parolin on that document at your presence, in your presence. And unfortunately, the Holy Father invited me to supper with Parolin.
Yes.
But no way to have that discussion. When I asked, can we discuss? The Holy Father said, I'm going to look into the matter. So I came back empty-handed. But not exactly, because I could see some embarrassment in the Holy Father. He showed so much affection to me, but he could not give me that favor because Parolin denied that favor. So that's very sad. So
now, you wrote in a recent post, Your Eminence, that the Pope is giving the sheep to the wolves. How so?
Yeah, because if you know those 7 people, and how can they become bishops? Because 2 of them are not observing the law of celibacy. That's notorious. Everybody knows. So I may be big sinner, but they are public sinners. So it's a scandal to make them bishops.
We should be clear for the audience, Your Eminence, these are 7 excommunicated bishops. They were never accepted by the Church, but after this deal, the Vatican normalized them and elevated them, made them heads of diocese, pushing out bishops who had been loyal to Rome and part of the underground church for years. That was the background
bishops.
here.
Yeah, because in those 7 dioceses, there are 2 dioceses where there was already a legitimate bishop, and they would ask to step down. Incredible. So
it's a sad situation.
I don't think I have other words to use. It is a betrayal of the real church. And I made a list of questions about that instruction, but no answer came. I even sent the those questions to all the cardinals, but well, not much reaction. They are very obedient to the Holy See.
Wow. The United States and her allies have been very critical of that new security law in Hong Kong, and there are calls to put pressure on the government of China. What's the best way for the U.S. Catholics and those in Europe, people of faith, to support the people of Hong Kong at this time, Your Eminence?
Oh, I know the Catholics in the United States are doing already much. They are praying for first of all, because many people assured me that they're praying for China. I have information that many are also doing many things. I hope the whole world may be awakened, because we can see the real face of the Chinese Communist Party, and it's now it's a spiritual warfare between the lie and the truth, between the selfish desire of power, of domination, and concern for other people. It's a warfare between the good and evil. I hope that the whole world should stand up.
Your Eminence, we will continue to report on this. Thank you for your bravery. Stay safe. You know, in the United States, we're having a conversation about the systemic oppression of people. We're seeing it in real time on the streets of Hong Kong and throughout China. Labor camps for Uyghurs, the killing indiscriminately of children, forced sterilizations. It's a horrendous regime, and it's right there if the world takes time to look for it and at it. Thank you for bringing it to our attention. We will, of course, keep you in our prayers. For love of my people, I will not keep silent. The most recent book by Joseph Cardinal Zen is still available in bookstores and everywhere. It's a worthy read. Your Eminence, thank you so much.
Thank you for your concern.
He's the former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, a prolific author. I spoke with him recently about his latest book, Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time. And boy, do we need solutions. Here's my interview with Newt Gingrich. Mr. Speaker, thank you for being here. I want to get your reaction to the news the president broke with us regarding the protection of statues and monuments via an executive order. He later announced that he means to use the Veterans Memorial Preservation Act. Listen.
We're looking at long-term sentences under the Act. We have a very specific Monuments Act, and we are looking at long-term jail sentences for these vandals and these hoodlums and these anarchists and agitators, and call them whatever you want. I want to also say this. If the state governments, did you see them all over in Seattle? They're very weak. And in Minnesota, they might need help. If they need help, the federal government is willing to help them. If these hoodlums come around,
Newt, the Veterans Memorial Preservation Act only applies to military monuments on public property. That wouldn't necessarily protect St. Junipero Serra or Thomas Jefferson, would it?
Well, I think it depends on how you want to interpret military. They may end up in court fighting over it, but it's certainly in the case of Jefferson, who had been an officer in the Revolutionary War. I think you could cover him without much of a stretch. All of the early presidents had been in the military. So, you know, and certainly General Grant would have been covered by that. He's been one of the targets. But what I think is amazing, Raymond, is the contrast between Governor Cuomo saying yesterday that, oh, if people want to break up statues, that's fine, because probably helps them get their feelings out. And President Trump saying correctly, this is about property, and it's about people having made decisions. And no, barbarians and vandals don't have a right to go around destroying things.
Newt, as a historian, this has got to strike you particularly because I remember during your entire tenure as Speaker, you would go out of your way to find the historical precedent and to put things in context, things you were doing in Congress, certain policies or events that were underway. Give me your sense of what this means from a sociological point of view, from a historical point of view, when you have Americans willy-nilly, without votes, without any consideration, just throwing ropes over these statues and yanking them down. What's happening? What does that tell you about where Americans are, or pieces of America are, at this moment?
Well, I think there are three different things coming together. One is, as I wrote in a recent newsletter, you have 3 generations of brainwashing into left-wing ideas. So they actually feel empowered to hate America because that's what their professors have taught them. The second is you have people who, like Antifa, who really are organized, hardened anti-Americans, and they deliberately want to go out and do this. And the third is you have just sort of a criminal element. I mean, there are people who, it's summertime, it's a cheap date, let's go destroy a statue. Or let's go raid a Nike store. I mean, you guys remember the pictures of people coming down Fifth Avenue, breaking into those stores. They were on a commercial venture. They were out grabbing all sorts of goodies. So I think all 3 of those come together. And then, as the president pointed out, you have such weak left-wing leaders in most of these cities that it is astonishing how bad they are.
As you heard, President Trump, Newt, earlier also weighed in on the Supreme Court's DACA ruling. He said the Dreamers would be taken care of. What would you advise the president to do with the DACA Dreamers? And what does his resubmitting an end to DACA accomplish?
Well, I think that the people who actually did come here at a very, very early age, many of whom no longer speak any language but English, a number of whom have been here long enough to graduate from high school as valedictorians, which real human beings. A priest in Atlanta who came as a DACA. I think the president will be well put to find a way to say to Congress, here's a very narrowly drawn bill that takes care of everybody who's legitimately came here as a young child. I will sign it if you'll pass it. Now, don't play games with it, yes or no. Would you like to offer them a permanent future? And don't play political games with it, and put the burden right directly back on the
And limit it to the people who are already here.
Limit it to people who came here at a very early age and who legitimately have spent virtually all their life here. I would also say you can instruct ICE to make violent criminals, drug dealers, gang members your primary targets, and you'll never get to a DACA person unless they're very rare DACA people who get in that kind of trouble. So you would basically not be targeting DACA Dreamers because you would be going after other people, and just say that. And just say up front, this is not what we're going. We're not in the business of tracking down somebody who came here at 3 years of age and is now 22.
Yeah. I want your reaction, Newt, to the question I asked the president regarding the pro-life cause. That despite President Trump's position on life issues, as a non-Catholic, many Catholics and evangelicals consider Joe Biden to be truly pro-life. Now, is President Trump the most pro-life president in history, as he maintains, or do the Biden supporters have a point here?
Well, I don't think the Biden supporters have any point. Biden is a Catholic. In fact, Clifton and I have been at Mass with him. But the fact is that Biden's position will be the position of the left wing of the Democratic Party, which is abortion paid for by the taxpayers. He said he would sign Nancy Pelosi's $3 trillion bill, which provides for tax-paid abortions in the 9th month as a fundamental break with everything we've ever said about it. So functionally, Biden will be a very pro-abortion president, no matter what he tells you about his personal feelings.
Now, I took a lot of heat, Newt, from a very small but vocal progressive Catholic circle for daring to ask that pro-life question of the president. They claim I should have corrected Trump when he supported the death penalty or echoed his support of the death penalty. But excuse me, the president, first of all, is not Catholic, and my job is not to share my position or anybody else's position with him, period. Barack Obama supported the death penalty. Biden, until just recently, after a lifetime of support, said he would like to see it end. But let's talk about abortion. You mentioned Joe Biden, he's a Catholic, he's committed to abortion on demand. How do you think that will impact the race and the Catholic support of his candidacy, or lack thereof?
Well, Look, I think for people who care deeply about the right to life, they're going to very rapidly realize that they can't possibly be for Biden, or frankly for the Democratic Party, which in places like New York is now in effect legalizing infanticide. The governor of Virginia, a Democrat who said, well, we want to keep the baby comfortable for a day or two while we decide whether or not to kill it after it's born. I mean, this is infanticide. When I was young, it would have been unimaginable. You'd have thought that was in some weird, strange, barbaric country. But now it's the left wing of the Democratic Party. And so I think that people who are serious about right to life are virtually all going to end up voting for Trump.
Yeah. Very quickly, Newt, speaking of life issues, what do you make of Planned Parenthood urging American businesses this week to offer free birth control coverage to combat systemic racism?
Well, I think it's very ironic because Planned Parenthood was founded by a person who believed in eugenics and actually wanted to have Planned Parenthood eliminate inferior races. Go back and look at the 1920s and look at what she wrote and said. It's bizarre.
Yeah, and that Margaret Sanger statue is still standing in New York. That also is very bizarre to me. I also asked President Trump about the push for mail-in balloting for this November's election. He told me it was a recipe for massive voter fraud. Do you agree, or is this something that's necessary given the public safety concerns we're seeing?
Well, the places that have actually held elections have had no problems. You know, we've had special elections in Wisconsin and New York, just had elections yesterday in several states. And they're able to deal with it. The Democrats, and let me draw a distinction. We've always had absentee voting. The military has always voted, sent in a ballot, but they've been very carefully controlled. That in Pelosi's $3 trillion bill, they have a provision for a totally uncontrolled election where you can't ask for the identity of the person. You can't ask for proof that they are who they are. You can't ask where they live. They can do ballot harvesting, so somebody can go through the nursing home and pick up 80 or 90 ballots. I mean, this is an invitation to a corrupt, dishonest election.
Let's talk about your new book, Trump and the American Future. How would you describe the conflict we're seeing in America today? You list in the book a number of accomplishments the president has already achieved, and I want to get to that in a moment, but describe that conflict as it exists today in American life.
Yeah, this is the biggest choice since Abraham Lincoln in 1860. In 160 years, we've never had this big a difference. If you take the Pelosi, Schumer, Biden team, what they stand for, and then you take the Trump, McConnell, McCarthy team and what they stand for, you're talking about two totally different Americas. If Schumer and Pelosi and Biden win, within a year or two, they will turn the country into a cross between California and Seattle. We will no longer recognize it as what was historically called America. And you see this in Pelosi's $3 trillion bill, which is just filled with radicalism. So I think that I literally don't know of any election that is as huge a gap as we're about to see. And I'm frankly very worried about it. I mean, you have a president who said to carry a Chinese virus, a deliberately created depression as a public health measure, huge conflict in cities. I mean, Trump has got a lot on his shoulders while being attacked by 93% of the news media. So this is going to be quite a campaign. I think we can win it. In fact, I think we probably will win it, but it's going to be amazing.
You write that President Trump has been profoundly and consistently committed to fighting for religious liberty, Newt. You write he has argued that religious beliefs are as legitimate as sexual orientations. In all these steps, he angers the secular left, including many in newsrooms across the country. A key part of the re-election campaign in the second term will be adapting to and getting ahead of these attacks. Now, Newt Gingrich, why has religious liberty become a cornerstone issue for this president, despite the animosity it causes in some circles?
Well, I think there's a difference between religiosity, how often do you go to church, and what do you have in your heart? And I think he was very, very deeply moved by his visit to Warsaw and his understanding of John Paul II. And I think that that actually had a huge impact on him and his understanding that if you don't have religious freedom, in the long run, you don't have any freedom. And I think that was a sincere intellectual conversion about the way the world works.
Oh, Newt, you write about the U.S.-China relationship in your book, and this is how you put it. Our misdiagnosis of the Chinese Communist Party and its totalitarian system has now created serious challenges for the United States. These challenges threaten our national security, interests, and values. The Chinese Communist Party has outlined 10 major industries that it aims to dominate under its Made in China 2025 plan, including biopharmaceuticals and high-performance medical devices, next-generation information technology, aerospace and aviation equipment, maritime engineering equipment, and high-tech maritime vessel manufacturing. Newt, has the COVID pandemic slowed China's progress or ambitions at all?
Well, first of all, I think it's an example of political correctness that what should have been either a Chinese virus or a Wuhan virus became COVID-19 in order to make the Chinese feel better. But the truth is it's a Chinese virus, and the Chinese lied about it, and their behavior has cost hundreds of thousands of lives and trillions of dollars of wealth precisely because the Chinese communist dictatorship lied to the world. I don't think that has slowed them down. I think what slowed them down is people have come to understand how profoundly dishonest they were. And people then started looking at other places where they're dishonest. And you now see a growing sort of repulsion away from the Chinese in Australia, in Canada, in Great Britain, in India, where 20 Indian soldiers were killed a week ago.
I saw that.
There's just a general sense that this is a country that is reaching to control all of us, and that the rest of us have an interest in banding together to not let them get away with it.
Before I let you go, Newt, what do you see as the greatest challenge to American survival now?
Our education system. I think our education system is so bad, both in that from K through 12, there are millions of young children being cheated by unionized government schools that fail totally. And then beyond that, in college and graduate school, we have students who are being totally misinformed and told things that are just plain not true. It's the combination of the two that makes it so difficult.
Yeah, a lot of that we're seeing play out on the streets, certainly here in America, but really around the world, Newt, you're seeing this historical blindness. I mean, it's unbelievable. Newt Gingrich, thank you so much for being here. Hope to see you soon. Trump and the American Future, Solving the Great Problems of Our Time by Newt Gingrich is available in bookstores everywhere and online. Thank you, Newt. And she's the daughter of one of the greatest baseball players of all time. Her father, Jackie Robinson, broke the color barrier in Major League Baseball in 1947, playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers. Later, he worked tirelessly for civil rights after retiring from baseball in 1956. Well, Sharon Robinson turned 13 in 1963 at the height of the civil rights movement. She tells her story in a new book called Child of the Dream, a memoir of 1963. Here's my interview with Sharon Robinson. Watch. Sharon Robinson, thank you so much for being here. Now, not only are you the daughter of baseball legend and civil rights icon Jackie Robinson, you grew up in the thick of the civil rights movement of the 1960s. Now, what made you decide to write this memoir? It really concerns your coming of age in 1963. Why write it now?
I wanted to tell the story of the 1963 Children's Crusade in Birmingham, Alabama. I wanted to share that story with children. I've worked for the past 50 years on helping kids find their voice. So I've been trying to find different ways to work with them on finding voice and why voice is important. And I just thought the Children's Crusade would be a way to do it. And then my editor helped me figure out the format, you know, and which voice to tell it in. He felt that as a memoir, it would work best. And as of writing it, I had to agree with him.
Yeah. Now, this book is geared toward middle grade readers, 8 to 12 and up. And your experience in that year, it was certainly critical. These teen years are hard enough without growing up the daughter of a superstar and a civil rights activist. Let's get into the story a little bit. It's 1963. You're 13 years old when Alabama Governor George Wallace made his infamous call for segregation. Where were you when that speech was delivered? And did you have a sense of what was happening at the time?
I was we had in our house, we had, I guess today you would call it a family room, but it was this room that was also our library. And that's where our television was, our family television. And we watched the 6 o'clock news together as a family. Unfortunately, my dad was not home, so normally he would be there to help me, guide me through these kinds of things. But I had my mother and my grandmother. So I was watching the news on television and heard it. And I was frightened of war because my older brother was not doing well, and I worried that he was going to go in the Army, be drafted in the Army. So I was very focused on war in the Vietnam coming up when I heard this announcement, and it frightened me, and I thought it was like a declaration of war.
Yeah. You write eloquently in the book about your struggle really with your own identity, what it meant to be an African American, growing up in a mostly white suburb, beautiful Connecticut suburb. What was that journey like? And when did you arrive at a sense of who you truly were? I suppose all of us during those teen years, you're kind of finding your way and defining yourself.
Absolutely. You know, it is a typical journey. For me, it was beginning like from 12 to 13, where I'm beginning to question everything and try to figure it out. The things that helped me was certainly my family and our family talks, but also it was Jack and Jill, which was a national organization for children, black children, and it was part social and part leadership development. So that kind of gave me a place to go with my peers at a time when black and white kids in teenage years split off, and they didn't socialize together. We had been great friends when we were in elementary school, but now things were changing, and I needed to find a group, and so that gave me a linkage to the black community.
Yeah, you tell the story of listening to records with your friend.
So really, but you know, it's an ongoing.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it was an ongoing process. I wouldn't say I didn't really come of age fully until I got to Howard University, because it was a historically black college, and everyone there was, you know, striving and great discussions and worldview, and so that really helped me carry it over the edge.
Yeah.
Into understanding who I was.
You write in the book of listening to records with your friend Candy during these early teen years, trying to figure out what it meant to be African American because you felt disconnected from the black community. Explain that experience, and what were you listening to?
Well, Motown. It was Motown records. So Motown singers, performers. That gave us, because remember our radio stations also played white music primarily. So this was our little 45 record players was our access to black music and the performers that we were loving, and that's when we started having parties and you know, actually being able to play this music and dance to it. So it was a very important linkage.
Talk about your father for a moment, Sharon. Obviously a baseball legend to the rest of us.
Yes.
He broke racial barriers in Major League Baseball, ended segregation in the league. What do you remember most about him and his example? Was he simply dad, or were you aware of his stature and significance early on?
Combination. You know, being dad was the most important, but I was very much aware of his baseball years, but I didn't understand them. So for example, I knew my dad played baseball. I was too young.
Yeah.
You know, I was 7, and when he retired, I was just turned 7. So I knew he was a baseball player. We had a trophy room. You know, I had all kinds of, saw the awards and the plaques and all of that. But it wasn't. I saw the Jackie Robinson story for the first time when I was in a day camp. And again, I was the only black kid in this camp, and I had no context to that early entry into baseball.
Wow. And
the racism he experienced. And it made me at that point say, wait a minute, what does this mean about the world I'm living in? So, you know, but I was too, back then we didn't talk so much about our personal stuff. So I couldn't even ask my parents when I got home, what does this mean? I just had to keep trying to understand it as the years went by.
He was really, I mean, he made his name with his great athletic ability, breaking barriers, and then he he became an activist. Is that the part of you that, is that the part of him that you most remember, where he was very engaged, he was in the media, he was, you know, he was leading and a part of a movement?
Yeah, absolutely. So when my dad retired from Major League Baseball, and it was 1957, the civil rights movement was really heating up, and he put right into his contract that he was going to use, he needed time to travel and to support the movement. And he was working at Chalkful Nuts, vice president of personnel, and that they agreed to this. So he started, but he was an activist going way back, Raymond. And just think when he's playing, when he's was in the Army, and it was court-martialed for refusing to move to the back of the bus in Texas. So he had shown activism in him all of his life, even when he was a kid and couldn't figure out why they wouldn't let the black and brown kids swim in the public swimming pool. You know, so he was always thinking as an activist, and you know, even the integration of baseball was activism. And he just wanted to use that as leverage to help continue the change in the country.
Give me a sense of...
and that's who I knew. I mean, and wonderfully...
Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just going to say that when he would travel south, he would come home and share stories with us. So it brought us into the larger movement, even though we were, you know, doing something on a much smaller basis in our own community in Stamford, Connecticut. You know, he tried to bring us in, allow us into that movement by sharing stories.
Yeah. Walk me through the role of faith in your household. I know with Dr. King and really the entire civil rights movement, it was all predicated on faith. It was a religious as well as a moral, you know, drive. Give me a sense of what your father, Jackie Robinson, imparted to you.
Correct. Well, first of all, my dad came from a very religious upbringing. His mom was deeply religious, a praying woman. I mean, they had 5 things they had to do in house. They had to go to school, they had to work, they had to take care of their younger siblings, and they had to do their homework, and they had to pray every day. You know, so my dad was a praying man, and faith was very much gave him the strength to carry forward on all of his challenges in life, from the professional ones to the personal ones. And so what my dad said to me, because I attended Sunday school every Sunday, but we went to the church in our community, so I walked to church every Sunday. And it didn't matter to me at all that I was in a white church, and I didn't really even understand that until I got to be the same teenage years when I realized my black friends were going to a black church. And then I went to a Baptist church, and I was like, oh, this is different, you know. But the church where I grew up, I loved it because it was like right in nature. You know, we would go into the woods and have, you know, special on sunrise service. You know, it's that kind of a small community church.
The Child of the Dream, your book covers.
Faith was, you know, but my dad, I was just going to say, you know, Raymond, faith was very important in my house, and prayer was important, but my dad also said it's how you live every day, Sharon. It's not whether you go to church every Sunday, it's how you live and how you treat people and how you give back to others. And that was really the major tenet in our house. So it was faith-based, certainly, but it was also service, you know, giving to others.
Child of the Dream, your book covers 1963 from your birthday in January through the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing in Birmingham. That's September. Now, so much happens in that 9-month span. You wanted to be part of the Children's March in Birmingham, but your father wouldn't let you go. What did he propose instead?
He came back from the Children's Crusade and having brought money down there and proposed that we as a family take on this mission. And the way he said we were going to do it is we're going to start doing a fundraiser at our house in Stamford, Connecticut. So, you know, we had a house with a lot of land, and it was not that far from New York City. So we had our first of many jazz concerts to raise money for Dr. King in June of 1963. And it was a family effort. So he gave each of us a role. You know, Dave and I, and the kids all had to clean their room, so they have a place for the artists to change. And we had to, you know, Dave and I organized the other children to sell hot dogs and sodas. And my older brother helped my dad park cars and greet the guests.
Wow.
My mom was like overall, she was the directress. And it was the first time we sort of had this kind of a family effort.
Yeah.
And then in August, he also told us we were going to march. We were going to go to the March on Washington, and which we did as the entire family went. And that was a really unifying force for us as a family. And it did allow us to feel like we were part of the larger civil rights movement. So that was critical to our development.
Sharon, before I let you go, and the book is...
And then, you know, we had the second jazz concert in September.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you write about in the book. Before I let you go, Child of the Dream, it captures this really pivotal moment. But when I reflect on all this, I keep thinking of Dr. King's words that he wanted children to be judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. Do you worry that that part of the message has been lost, if you will, or somehow subverted?
Yes. Well, you know, what my dad taught me is that we were changing laws during the civil rights movement, but you can't legislate against hate. So what we had to work and the struggle was going to be an ongoing process. So yes, we are still fighting for equality, dignity for all people, you know, appreciation for differences, and just this equal America that we envisioned many years ago and Dr. King talked about. Certainly opportunity and access is, you know, always the biggest challenge.
A Child of the Dream, a memoir of 1963 by Sharon Robinson, is available at bookstores everywhere and online. He's a priest of the Diocese of Charleston, South Carolina. He served as an Anglican priest before being ordained into the Catholic Church in 2006. He's also a well-known columnist and blogger. I spoke with Father Dwight Longenecker recently about his new book. It's a timely one. It's called Immortal Combat, Confronting the Heart of Darkness. Take a look. Now, you believe the church has lost sight of one of its missions, direct confrontation with the devil. How so?
Well, I think that in the modern world, a lot of modernist theologians and priests and prelates are a bit embarrassed by the supernatural aspects of our religion, a bit embarrassed also, I should say, by the cross and the idea of blood sacrifice and so forth. And so over the last 50 or 60 years, they've quietly been putting those things in the sort of ecclesiastical attic and instead producing a faith which is much more about fellowship and happiness and making the world a better place and so forth. But this neglects actually the real streak of darkness and evil that is woven through our hearts and our society.
In the book, you write, the Christian life is a battle or it is nothing at all. The baptized are warriors, and the church is not mild, it is militant. What are you getting at there? And describe the 10 swords that you discuss in the book that you recommend for this battle that we all face.
Yes, you know, the strain of militancy runs right through the sacred scriptures, from Genesis right through to the book of Revelation, where it says there was war in heaven and Michael and his angels did battle with the great enemy. The Psalms are full of military sort of language. The Lord strengthens my hands, my arms for war, and my fingers for battle, and so forth. And it's also true in the lives of the saints, and down through history, the church has had a militant aspect to it. And we're not talking about jihadist Muslims who are cutting off heads and blowing people up. We're talking about a spiritual warfare. St. Paul says we do not fight against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers in the high places. So this has been there right from the beginning. But again, in the modern age, we've been embarrassed by this. And to be honest, there have been incidents in the Catholic history, like the Crusades and so forth, which a lot of have been largely misunderstood and have been seen as a blot on our history. So they've quietly removed hymns like "Onward, Christian Soldiers" and "Fight the Good Fight," and tried instead to give us a much more easygoing, marshmallow kind of religion. And I say now's the time to realize that it's a battle.
Yeah, tell us about those 10 swords that you recommend for this battle. Just run through a few of them.
Yeah, in the first half of the book, I talk about the real nature of the sin of the world, and then in the second half of the book, say, what are we going to do about it? And towards the end of the
Hmm.
book, I give what I call seven swords of the spirit, and these are things we're already used to as Catholics, the sacraments and our prayer life and so forth. But I've tried to recast them for us to see that all of the things that we do. In celebrating the sacraments and maintaining silence and service uh, and so forth is actually a living out of the cross, or bringing the power of the cross and the victory of the cross
Hmm.
into the present moment.
Hmm. Your journey to becoming a Catholic priest is a bit unusual. You grew up evangelical, you were ordained as an Anglican priest, and then your whole family was received into the Catholic Church. This path has given you a perspective on religion that I think is so unique. In a recent blog post, you worry Christianity will die in the West. How can we save modern Christianity, and Catholicism particularly?
Well, one of the things I've been writing about recently in my blog is that modernist Christianity, which has been reduced to moralistic therapeutic deism, in other words, rules to obey, and how Christianity can make you, deal with your tired marriage and help to be a better parent and stuff. That's therapeutic. Um, and deism,
Hmm.
God, if there is a God, he's sort of on the other side of the clouds and he's having a nap. This kind of Christianity or religion, I contend, isn't even religion. It's something else. See, religion is in every place down through history, in every civilization, has had to do with an encounter, an existential encounter of the human beings with the supernatural, with the other side, with angels and demons and heaven and hell and the afterlife. That's what religion is about. That's what it's always been about. And so, reducing it to a bland set of morals and a bland set of therapy and so forth is really, it might be helpful in the world, but it's not actually religion. And therefore, people want religion. They don't want just a list of respectable rules. They can get that from the Rotary Club or the Girl Scouts. Um,
Yeah.
they they want religion, which has to do with an encounter with the divine.
Father, respectable rules sound like a good thing at this point. You have forces, even within Catholicism, that are basically rubber stamping every secular idea that comes around the transom. I mean, whether it's social movements or political movements, or you should hate this one or love that one. And it has nothing to do with the religion you're talking about.
Yes, and so what happens when we adapt to the spirit of the age is we will soon be going along with every sort of wind of doctrine, as St. Paul says, and we'll lose the
Hmm.
faith completely. And if we simply jump on the latest bandwagon, which seems to be supporting some worthy cause in some way. Don't get me wrong, these causes are worthy, and many of the causes are things which Christians can be involved in. But my point is, they're not actually the religion. They're the consequences of living a Christian life and being a certain kind of transformed person, but they're not primarily the religion. The religion has to do with an encounter with our Lord Jesus Christ, crucified, buried, and risen again, which transforms our lives. That is preaching the cross and Him crucified. That's what my book is about, and it's trying to get
Yeah.
back at this. If I could say quickly, one of the reasons I'm passionate about this is the summer Billy Graham died. I was coming down Interstate 85 and saw his cortege moving from North Carolina to Washington. And the
Hmm.
bridges over the highway were crowded with people who were paying homage to him. I went back and watched one of his old crusades, and I thought, here's a man who, in all simplicity, just always uncompromisingly preached the need for sinners to face their redemption in the cross of our Lord Jesus Christ. That's what it's about.
Hmm.
And we have forgotten that.
Yeah. Yeah. A good reminder. Father Dwight Longenecker, thank you so much. The book Immortal Combat, Confronting the Heart of Darkness, is available now at bookstores everywhere and online. Father Dwight, thank you for being here.
Thanks for the invitation.
And summer reading season marches on. All 3 installments of the Will Wilder saga are available in paperback, hardback, and audiobook. Visit willwilderbooks.com. You can read a preview. I think you can listen as well. And you can order yours. And don't forget, The World Over is a podcast. We're available on iTunes and Spotify. You can take us around for your morning drive, on the treadmill. Don't you want me talking to you during those moments? So we're on the go, and we're a podcast. That's all the time we have for now. Be sure to catch us next week. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.